Hey, can you imagine losing $190 million plus dollars, wasting years and years of your life and it being for nothing? Man, that's exactly what the NASA Mars Orbiter team saw in 1999 when their Mars orbiter crashed into the atmosphere of Mars itself, and all of their dreams, all of their vision, all of their hope went into the drain. Now, I want to back up just for a moment. Let's imagine it's December 11th, 1998, and there's two celebrations going on this beautiful day. Somewhere in probably the northwestern portion of Tennessee, in a little town called Union City, there's likely a birthday party happening for this amazing 2-year-old named Austin. He's probably celebrating with his family. They're giving him cake. They're giving him ice cream. The 2-year-old's having the best day of his entire life because it's all about him. But honestly, up to this point in his life, everything had already been about him, right? He's 2 years old. And if you were to ask his wife today, I imagine she would probably say not much has changed now that he's turning 30 this year. But there was another celebration happening on that day, and this one was in the NASA Command Center. So December 11th, 1998, they launched the NASA Mars Climate Orbiter, and this was a spacecraft that was designed with a plan and purpose of going up into space, going to the planet Mars, and orbiting the planet as a means of collecting climate data that they could use for a variety of reasons. And on December 11th of 1998, they launched this orbiter, and it was a successful launch. All of the sweat, all of the tears, all of the agony, all of the late night calculation grinds, all of the late night working together as a team, missing meals with your family, all of it was sort of validated on December 11th of 1998 when they saw their baby, right, literally get launched into space, and the hardest part of the entire mission be successful, that being launching through the Earth's atmosphere, right? So there's this huge celebration. They're high-fiving each other, they're hugging each other, they're congratulating, handshaking, asking each other if they want to go get drinks after. They're doing all the things that you probably have seen on movies that talk about where you see like the NASA Command Center right after a successful launch. But little did they know that just because the mission was successful and they didn't see any deviation at the beginning didn't mean it wasn't going to be a colossal and catastrophic failure by the time it reached Mars. And this is something that we can extrapolate some really important spiritual truths for us as fully devoted disciples of Jesus Christ, right? Because the rocket, right, it launched and everything looked good, and they couldn't yet see because distance had yet not revealed the deviation that was in the design system. But distance revealed as that rocket went 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 416 miles. That distance eventually revealed that there was a catastrophic design failure and that it had deviated from its original design path, and it got too close to the atmosphere of Mars. It got burned up, and all of their dreams went down the drain. And so too can we do that in our lives, right? Where we celebrate success on the front end, never to see it come to fruition on the back end, right? But let's just walk through this a little bit and understand how it happened. Because as you can imagine, after you lose a $190+ million, so like in today's terms, that's over a $200 million rocket. After you lose something like that, there's obviously going to be an internal investigation. Somebody getting fired. You know what I'm saying? Somebody getting in trouble. And throughout this internal investigation, what they learned was there was something as simple as a conversion error. Man, like that as an engineer myself, that is incredibly convicting. That's incredibly humbling. That something, just imagine this for a moment. You're taking a test in school, and before you even get to question one, and I don't know if you've ever had a test like this, before you even get to question one, there's like this little disclaimer at the top that says, hey, before proceeding, what I need you to do is make sure that every one of your answers is in the metric system, or every one of your answers is in the U.S. customary system. Or maybe there's something like, before you proceed, make sure you draw a blue circle in the top right corner of this page. And then all of a sudden, you go through this entire assignment, you knock it out of the park. You're 10 for 10. These physics equations are nothing for you because you've been studying, you've been working, you've been grinding. And then all of a sudden, you turn it in, you're expecting the 100 because you know you got every single answer right. And then you get your test back, and at the very top, it says 0 out of 10. 0%. And then you get concerned. You're like, man, did I miss something? And you go through question 1, you got it right. You go through question 2, you got it right. All 10 of them, you knocked them out of the park, but yet you got a 0. And it was because at the very beginning, you skipped over the most fundamental part of the exam and you had deviated from the assignment because the assignment was less about getting the right conclusion and it was more about following direction. Right? So the same can be true in something like as simple as a conversion error when it comes to aeronautics, right? When I was at the University of Tennessee, I originally enrolled there having planned to be in the aerospace engineering program, and I quickly learned that I was not smart enough to be in that room. But honestly, after a mistake like this, looking back, I'm like, maybe I could have done it. But all jokes aside, I learned very quickly I wasn't smart enough to be in that room. Eventually go to mechanical engineering, just wasn't a passion of mine, and finally find myself in civil, which is an area and discipline that I actually really love. And I believe God made me an engineer through and through, and it has helped my pastoring tremendously because it helps me see the world a little differently than most. It helps me become a natural problem solver, but as an engineer, one thing that we have the proclivity to do is to jump into the weeds of equations and miss the forest for the trees because we can make so many assumptions and I can assume things of people that I think is happening and it isn't happening. I can assume you're doing something and you're not doing something. I can assume the work had already been done and I'm just going to do my part, right? And that's exactly what happened in this conversion error because there was 2 design teams on this project, if you would. There was the Lockheed Martin, which is like this military contractor that designs specifically like aeronautics for the military or for NASA. They designed the Mars climate orbiter, but there was also a second design team, and it was the NASA design team, where basically they would take the rocket that Lockheed Martin designed, and then they would take it to the JPS, the Jet Propulsion System in NASA, and they basically would take it from there, right? Make sure everything's lined up, make sure the mission is aligned, make sure all the calculations had been double checked. But there was a problem. The Lockheed Martin design team designed using the U.S. customary units, which we can, when we think of that, we think of like imperial units, so like feet, pounds, inches, miles, something we're very familiar with here in the West. But there was a problem because really we're the only country that uses that unit system. And in 1975, there was something called the U.S. Congress, or in 1975, the U.S. Congress passed something called the Metric Conversion Act. And the reason for this is because the entire rest of the world was following a different standard. And we were kind of the oddball out. And it was putting us behind the 8 ball on a lot of things because we had scientists and physicists coming from all across the world to work on some of our design teams, and it was causing friction on the team because they would have to spend a lot of time doing some very elementary unit conversion because they would work something out and they'd be like, hey, this is so-and-so feet away, and then the person would look at them and be like, great, how many meters? And all of a sudden you compound that with years and years and years of design research, and then you get yourself in a command center and you're like, hey, things are on the line at this point. Like lives could be literally on the line. Millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line. The last thing you need to be doing is a unit conversion. So in 1975, right, Congress recognized this and they passed that Metric Conversion Act as a means to trying to consolidate or align us with the rest of the world in terms of unit consistency. But the problem is, by the time we get to like 1992, all the federal agencies had really aligned with the law that was passed in 1975. So NASA was using the metric system. So this is something you can think of when you think of like meters or kilometers or kilograms, right? NASA was using the metric system already, and as were all federal agencies by the time we get to 1992. The problem is, just because Congress can mandate a public entity like NASA use the metric system, they had no influence over Lockheed Martin, which was a private sector company. So you have the Lockheed Martin team using feet, pound, and inches, and you have the NASA team using meters, kilograms, and newtons in their design. And then whenever the Lockheed Martin design team handed over, right, the rocket to NASA to take it to the JPS, the Jet Propulsion System, or JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, and to be able to do the test, the NASA team assumed something, right? And that's a big word for us. That's something we should never do. Never assume something of people. Never assume they had accomplished something, because assumption is a vision killer. Assumption is a goal stripper. This assumption is the number one way that you're going to see plans fail. Right? So what they had done is they assumed that the Lockheed Martin team had converted their units to the metric system. Why? Because it was the law, right? But they didn't quite understand and realize the gravity of the moment when they made that assumption, because the private sector had not yet adjusted, and even to this day largely has not adjusted to the metric system. Now you have a design, right, that was designed to be in kilograms, or it should have been in kilograms and newtons, but yet it was designed in feet. The problem with this is that aircraft, that vehicle, cannot operate faithfully using two different design systems, right? It needs one to get the job done. And that is so true for us too, right? Just like the aircraft cannot operate according to two different standards, your soul cannot operate according to two different standards. Because if you live according to the world on Monday and you live according to the word on Sunday, the vehicle of your life may not deviate on Tuesday by much, but go years and years and years of doing that. You're going to fall into the trap of syncretism, and eventually that small deviation is going to lead to tragic consequence and catastrophic failure. And I believe that's probably where a lot of us are, right? We're living according to two different standards. We got a little bit of the metric system, we got a little bit of the U.S. customary system, and we don't think it's a big deal because we're not seeing the immediate consequences of our actions yet, given time, because distance reveals trajectory, distance reveals deviation. As we travel that 416 million miles towards Mars, as we take 10 months to do that, all of a sudden that small deviation, it's like a snowball effect, becomes really big, right? And it becomes a huge problem. And eventually it becomes an incorrect or uncorrectable problem. You can't correct it, right? That's a terrifying place for us to be spiritually, right? And I think we can extract a couple different principles from this story and apply them very practically to our lives. And I think we would be all the better for it. So some examples of this, right? You can see small deviations in your marriage. You can see small deviations in your spiritual life. For example, like in your marriage, what starts as an unresolved argument. You don't obey the Bible whenever it says, let not your head go down angry, resolve matters, especially in the context of a marriage, before going to sleep, right? No, you let the argument simmer, you go to sleep, and then all of a sudden you wake up and everything's fine. You're over it, right? But you didn't realize what you did was you deviated by 1 degree. And just like an airplane taking off from the Los Angeles airport, heading towards New York, if they're off by 1 degree bearing, they're going to miss the airport by an entire state, right? And just because you woke up and you didn't feel the immediate consequence of your decision, of your argument, the reality is your marriage is now 1 degree off of alignment, right? Because you didn't follow the standard that the word set for your life of don't go to bed angry with your brother, your sister, your husband, or your wife. Resolve matters quickly. Instead, you follow the wisdom of the world that just says, hey, time heals all wounds, right? Just go to bed, sleep it off. You'll wake up, you'll be happy. And then all of a sudden, that one conversation leads to one thought that leads to one decision. And then sure enough, you might actually find yourself in a bed with someone else's wife. And that's a terrifying place to be, because it started with one deviation and it jumped to a catastrophic failure. And you may be thinking, you know what, that is so stupid. There's no way that would ever happen. It happens far more than you can possibly imagine. Like Christian marriages, right, are no better than marriages that are not Christian statistically in terms of divorce rate. Maybe just like minuscule, like very little amount. But in the broad scheme of things, you know, because Christian marriages are following two different standards of unit system, right? They're measuring their lives according to the word and a little bit according to the world. We're seeing a very high divorce rate when it comes to marriages. One conversation with a coworker leads to a thought when you get home and you're by yourself, and all of a sudden you may not be physically, but you are mentally undressing your coworker, right? And then that one thought that led to, or that one conversation that left the door open to one thought, eventually leads to one decision that you never ever thought you would make, right? You never thought you would make. And this leads to a marriage that's up and down. And what is the consequence? The consequence is the very person that you cut covenant with, that you went to an altar to die with so that two could become one. And often children are the consequence of that, having to feel the weight and bear the responsibility or the weight of your decision that was just incredibly dumb. Right? Instead of you course correcting off of your deviation, you just went mission on. Like, you just kept going, you kept progressing, and then all of a sudden you didn't just find yourself a little bit off. You found yourself like the Mars orbital rover, hundreds of miles off your designed destination. We can see this in our spiritual life as well. And so not just in our marriages, but also privately in our spiritual life, where you wake up one Sunday and it's raining, right? Or you wake up one Sunday and you're like, you know what? I had a late practice. I'm a coach. I had a late practice last night, or I have a film session at this afternoon right after church, and you know what? I don't think it's a big deal. I'm gonna skip this Sunday. You know what? The church is not a building, right? It's the temple of the living God. It's me, right? I'm just gonna watch online. I'm not gonna connect to the body. And that one small deviation leads to, you know what? Now you've gone a couple weeks and you haven't been back to church, and it's honestly not even something that's on the forefront of your mind at this point. So you've abandoned all of your serving responsibilities. And let me ask you, who's feeling the consequence of you not using the gift inside of you, right? Who's not getting saved because you're not there to witness to them? They may be able to listen to the sermon and not hear a word that comes out of your pastor's mouth because he's feeding the congregation meat, rightfully so, because it's church and we're supposed to first equip the saints. But as the congregation is getting fed meat, that person sitting there, it's going right over the head, and they need milk. They need to run into you serving them coffee in the lobby. They need to run into you holding the door, driving the golf cart to the car. They need to run into you as you're ministering to their children and in kids ministry. But yet you have abandoned post because you deviated from church just a little bit. You skipped a couple Sundays. You've stepped back from serving, and all of a sudden your prayer life starts slipping away. You're not in the Bible near as much. And then you're wondering why months go by and your spiritual life is an up and down roller coaster, right? And it's manifesting in your physical life as well. You're feeling a little more tense in your marriage. You're feeling a little more tense in your school system. You're feeling a little more tense in your normal rhythms or normalities of life. And no wonder. It's because that small deviation led to catastrophic, right, realities and consequences. And just because you didn't perceive the deviation when it immediately happened didn't mean, or let's put it this way, just because you didn't see collapse when you made the decision didn't mean the structure wasn't collapsing. That's a big truth that we need to understand. Just because you don't see the immediate consequence of your decision doesn't mean it's not deviating, heading towards a consequence that cannot be corrected, right? So those are two different examples that we can see that, small deviations leading to catastrophic outcomes in our in normal lives, whether it be in our marriages or in our spiritual lives. And something that's important in both of those, and that we can extrapolate out of the Mars rover, is that there's this term that was normalized. It was called the normalization of deviance, right? Normalization of deviance. And this was a term that was really popularized after the Challenger, the space shuttle, the Challenger disaster, right? When they did their QA/QC, when they did their internal investigation and tried to learn why that disaster took place, they ended up coining a term, the normalization of deviance. And what it means is that it's ultimately where organizations, right, or just think relationships, where relationships gradually redefine what is normal, and they redefine what is abnormal, right, as acceptable. What you once were not okay with, you're all of a sudden okay with, and you start normalizing the deviance from the plan. 1 degree is not a big deal, and then all of a sudden you get 10 miles and you're 10 feet off. And then you start normalizing that, and you just say it's part of life. It's part of the rhythms of life. And the important part of that term is that just because collapse has not happened, right? Just because the bridge has not collapsed does not mean collapse is not happening, right? You may be going over the bridge and you're not seeing collapse and you think everything's okay, but you don't see the cracks in the foundation that is going to collapse unless it is corrected, right? You may have just launched a $190 million space shuttle into space heading towards Mars. And what seems like not a big deal when you look at deviance in terms of like being to like the thousandth of a decimal place, as distance continues to grow, right, the deviance begins to manifest in a bigger way. And all of a sudden you're off in a way that you cannot correct. So what can we learn from this? I think we can learn three things from this. And I think these are three very important practical principles that you can apply to your life today. These are principles that I have applied to my life, certainly, and it has made me better as a fully devoted disciple of Jesus Christ. The first one is that echo chamber. The first one is that the Mars orbital rover revealed that there had been echo chambers instead of feedback loops. And what I mean by that is like when you surround yourself with people who never push back on the vision, because we're always okay with people push back on systems or structures or this or that or the other, but we're never okay when people push back on our vision, because our vision's from the Lord, right? But we have to realize it's not our empire we're building, it's his kingdom. And sometimes God changes and gives fresh vision, fresh perspective, because he has a new thing coming that he cannot sew this new garment or this new patch onto an old garment. He cannot take the new wine that he has and put it into an old wineskin. God may be wanting to use new, fresh language, and hey, maybe the language is not yours, right? Your language may have been for a time or season or for a demographic of people, and maybe that demographic, as it has aged, needs to pass the language that is in its mouth to the next generation to be able to more effectively grow younger, right? Something tragic could happen is a church could grow and grow astronomically, but it's growing old, right? And all of a sudden you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but the thousands of people are 60, 70, 80 years old, and there's no young people, because when all of them die, who's left, right? But there has to be a way to bridge the gap between what is and what will be, or what has been and what could be, right? So they're echo chambers instead of feedback loops. Rather than taking in criticism and applying it practically and adjusting from deviance, right? Or maybe it's just resetting the vision altogether. They've surrounded themselves with people who are yes men, yes women. And that's a dangerous place to be. So we don't want to have echo chambers instead of feedback loops. The second one is they had compartmentalized teams that executed the plan well, right? They had compartmentalized teams that executed the plan well, but they missed the vision due to deviation. So you set out an objective and you say everyone on the team has to do this thing. If you don't do this thing, you're not on the team. And then all of a sudden the team is performing well, but you find out the leader, right, is not doing the very thing that you asked them to do. Well, that one deviation, right, is not killing the plan, it's killing the culture, right? Because when you permit or you make it permissible for that one person to deviate from what you said just based off production, what you're building is a culture that is based off production and not who they actually are, or their spirituality, for example. And the more that you deviate, the consequences you'll burn people out. The consequences people will hate coming into work. People will avoid certain areas of the building just because they know someone might be there. When you start normalizing, right, production over spirituality in the context of ministry, in the context of church, that's a dangerous place to be. And then we wonder, and we step back, why are things so compartmentalized? Why are things so ISO'd or siloed around here? Well, maybe the reason things are siloed is because it's not that we've deviated from the plan, right? We're executing the plan and you're doing it really well, but we've deviated from the culture. And it has compartmentalized our teams to where we have some teams who may not be executing as well, but the culture is healthy. And you have other teams where they're not missing a beat, but the culture is being led into a dumpster fire, right? It's the second thing that we see on this Mars orbital rover. And the third one is, it kind of goes hand in hand with the first two. There is no QA QC structures in place. You see, in this tragedy, what I found interesting is that there was no lawsuit. Why? Because NASA assumed full responsibility for the failure. And they are not the ones that made the mistake, right? It was the Lockheed Martin team that used units that the federal government did not abide by. But yet NASA assumed responsibility because ultimately the buck stops with us as leaders. It was their responsibility to have QA/QC systems and structures in place to be able to identify deviations, to be able to identify cultural abnormalities, and to course correct accordingly. But they did not have that. And the same is true in many churches or many ministries across the country. We have great kids ministry. We have great student ministry. We have great worship. We have great next steps. We have great teams, if you would, like the coffee team or the parking lot team, the VIP team. We have great teams, we have great systems, we have great structures, but we have no QA/QC. We have no one making sure that these teams are cohesively together when it comes to culture. Sure, they may have the same end goal in mind, and that's people getting saved, but if they don't have the same culture in their practice, they're going to deviate from the end goal, and they're going to start ideating ways that they can achieve their own ideating means to achieve their own end. That's why we need QA/QC people in the church. That's why NASA needed a QA/QC person, and they actually have them now. That's verifying, that's checking that, hey, we're not just interested in knocking out jet propulsion. We're not just interested in knocking out space travel and traveling further than anything has ever traveled in the universe, going 416 million miles, 10 years or a 9.5 month journey, right? We're not just interested in achieving all of these great things. We're interested in mastering the fundamentals, right? And what if a church, right, were to do that as well? Where they said, I don't care how productive you are. I don't care how productive you are. I don't care how big of a hole we have to fill or how big of shoes we have to fill. If you, right, are leading in a way that is inconsistent with the culture, you're not doing what I asked you to do, right? You're not following suit with the ask that I've given you. Everyone else is, but for some reason you've decided to deviate. You have to go in a different direction from that person, because the reality is the more that you deviate distance and the longer that you permit it, people are the consequence. And the first people that feel the consequence is the team. And when the team feels it, then it's the people they lead. And when it's the people that they lead, then it's the congregation, it's the church body. And they live in a church shopping culture already. And it's not that another church down the street is growing in terms of reaching lost people. Maybe they're growing because they're reaching your people better than you are, because you deviated from the culture, from the plan, slightly, ever so slightly, and it's starting to distance is starting to reveal tragic consequence thereof. So those are the three things that the Mars rover revealed. What are the three things that we can really apply, right? Number one, embrace people who push back against the norm, right? Embrace people who push back against the norm, because you may think you have an incredible vision. You may think you have incredible language for the vision, and you might, but it may not be for the people that you're leading. It may be for the people that you have led, right? The number one place to see where you should go is in the next generation who's going to carry it. Where you led is great and it's dandy, but if we focus all of our time in finishing well, we'll make sure that whoever comes behind us doesn't begin well, right? So we have to make sure that we're embracing people who push back against our vision, push back against our language, so that it can be crafted and normalized, because in the critique you might find out that there is a fundamental cultural misunderstanding of you have inconsistent units, and you'll never know that if you create a culture where people are allowed to critique your systems and structures but not allowed to critique your vision and language. If they can't critique your vision and language, you probably already, right, have inconsistent units. You just may not see it because you're veiled behind this veil called leadership and authority. The second one, we need to elevate spirituality over execution in the church, right? Spirituality is built on fundamental principles, right? Execution is built on worldly principles. Someone can execute really well and not read their Bible all week long. Someone can execute a game plan really well, and if you ask them the doctrine of salvation or the doctrine of the baptism of the Holy Spirit, or you ask them what communion or water baptism is, and they have no clue. But at the end of the day, who cares if they know Planning Center if they don't know their Bible, right? Who cares if they can schedule a team if they can't handle conversations when their team comes up and asks spiritual questions, right? But you have to start elevating spirituality over execution. You need to surround people who are highly spiritual with people who can execute, right? Because oftentimes the most spiritual person in the room is not someone who can execute very well, but what they can do is make sure that room is covered in prayer, which is far more important than that room being covered in excellence or being covered in execution. And then the third one, right? Spiritual QA QC. Every church needs a QA QC person, making sure that discipleship is happening across every single area of ministry. That it doesn't matter if you're leading the next steps department, it doesn't matter if you're leading the next gen department, it doesn't matter if you're leading the worship department, it doesn't matter if you're leading the care department. Across all of them, they have not only shared vision, but they have shared units of measurement. And a unit of measurement that is extremely practical is, hey, not how many people did you schedule this week? Not even what are the names of your team members. It's who are you discipling, right? Who are you discipling? And if they give you an answer that is no one, right? If you ask, who are you discipling? Who are you living in group life with? And they're like, you know what? I'm not actually in group life. I'm not discipling anyone. I'm discipling my family, right? Well, congratulations. They're doing the very bare minimum according to Scripture, because the Bible says, how can you disciple the church if you can't first disciple your home? That means you're supposed to disciple your home so that you can go out and disciple more, because you disciple your home by first letting them see you disciple other people. And if you're not discipling anyone else, they're not catching what you're teaching. And that's a scary reality for us to live in, because you can be the most caring person in the world, you can be the most compassionate person in the world, you can be the best executor in the entire world, yet still mislead a team spiritually, which is the number one responsibility for a church and for a ministry, because you have inconsistent units. You're measuring yourself by efficiencies and production value and literal growth in terms of people, and you're not measuring yourself according to the unit system of Scripture of making disciples. Who cares if a church grows if you're not making disciples? What good is teaching someone calculus for 10 years if after 10 years they can't take a very basic derivative of an equation, or they don't learn how to integrate, right? Those are very basic principles when it comes to algebraic formulation. What good is teaching someone every single Sunday for 10 years if they still can't explain the doctrine of salvation? But yet they've been serving, yet they've been doing this, they've come to every conference. What good is doing all of that if they can't explain the very basic, most basic fundamental nature of their salvation? You see, that's why discipleship is important, and every ministry leader, every team leader needs to be intentionally discipling someone else. And that person they're discipling needs to know they're being discipled by them. Because if you were to ask someone, you say, who are you discipling? They give a name, and you go ask that name, who's discipling you? And they don't say that person, man, talk about missed unit system or inconsistent conversion in terms of unit system. That's a perfect example, right? So this is a beautiful passage of Scripture that I think ties all of this together. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25 through 27 says, let your eyes look straight ahead, right? Don't look to the left. Don't look to the right. Let your eyes look straight ahead and your eyelids right before you. And then this word right here, ponder the path of your feet. Man, what if we pondered the path of our feet? What if we pondered the state of our ministries? What if we pondered the state of our families, of our spirituality? Ponder the path of your feet and let all your ways be established, right? Do not turn to the right or to the left. Remove your foot from evil. Do not turn from the right or left means do not deviate, not even 1 degree. Because though you may not feel the consequence of a decision here, doesn't mean you're not heading towards tragic consequence, which is only going to be revealed by distance, because distance reveals deviation. Deviation leads to catastrophe and missing the mark of the vision, right? So my prayer is that you remove your foot from evil. And how you remove your foot from evil is you stop turning to the right or to the left. You stop living a little bit according to the world and a little bit according to the word. You stop leading a little bit according to standard business practices that make a business strong and a little bit of what the church should look like and should be. You stop living this life of syncretism, right? And deviating from the right or to the left, because when you do that, what you're doing is you're pondering, right, the path of your feet. And the more time you spend reflecting and exercising, the more time you spend reflecting and pondering and exercising and applying change to your life, and you spend time course correcting from the deviations that you uncover, the consequence of that is every single one of them, all of your ways are established. And then all of a sudden, the mission doesn't become catastrophic. The mission becomes very, very influential. The mission becomes helpful, and it accomplishes what it was set out to do. So rather than your orbital machine going to Mars and being consumed by fire, getting close to the atmosphere, no, it spends years and years and years doing what it was designed to do, gathering climate data so that someday, right, Elon Musk can go build us a habitable space on Mars. But let this meditate in your heart as it has been mine, right? Don't deviate. Let that be the word for you. Get to church on Sunday. Stop making excuses. Nothing else is important, right? Or as important as getting your family to church. And if you're making that excuse, that's already an indicator of deviation, right? Get to church on Sunday. And don't spend time arguing with me or your family or your loved ones or your friends why you had to miss. Try to tell God why you had to miss, and see if having his perspective changes your outlook on the situation, right? So get to church on Sunday. Tell your wife, tell your husband that you love them, right? Stop deviating by going out to the golf course every single weekend. Husbands, wives, stop allowing that, right? The normalization of deviation. That's exactly what you're doing when you allow your husband to take these trips every single week or once a month, or even going to the golf course here, going to the golf course there, and they're traveling alone, and you're opening the door for something to happen. Just one conversation that led to one thought that led to one tragic consequence. So stop normalizing deviance. Your husband needs to be in your home. It doesn't mean that you don't need a time to relax, but let them relax in the context of a retreat with their church family, not a retreat where they're sipping beers on a golf course, right? So stop normalizing deviance in your marriages. Get to church on Sunday. And then church leaders, the way that we stop it, right, stop the spiritual bleeding, is we get a QA/QC person in every single ministry, someone who's making sure we're aligned with not our vision, let's get that out of our mind, not aligned with our vision, but aligned first and foremost with the vision that is laid out in Scripture to make disciples of all nation. Because if you're not careful, you'll deviate from the language of Scripture to go and make disciples, and all of a sudden you'll start substituting words. Discipleship is kind of a hard word. Let's make it a little bit easier, a little more palatable, and then all of a sudden you're not making disciples, you're making this, and then that turns into something else, and then all of a sudden years go by and you have deviated from the entire plan altogether. So hey, this week, the prayer I want to invite you to pray with me is, God, course correct me. Don't let me turn to the left or to the right. Don't let me deviate, but let me observe everything that is in your word according to your word, and may I follow it, and may my ways be established, right? And when that happens, you're going to be not like the Mars climate orbiter, right? Whose deviation led to catastrophe. You're going to be living a life of plan, purpose, and value. Hey, I love you big. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.